The story begins by introducing a young girl named Nancy, who was urinating in the bushes and just found out that she was pregnant. At that time, she was accompanied by her best friend, named Tabitha. Nancy also told about her pregnancy. Tabitha was curious and asked who the father of the fetus she was carrying was. However, Nancy replied that she did not know because lately she happened to be in contact with several of her male friends. Because she had to work at a restaurant and was on the afternoon shift, Nancy rushed to work and changed clothes in the car. While Nancy was busy driving and listening to music, suddenly her car engine stopped and broke down, which forced her to walk and leave her car. While walking, Nancy met a co-worker named Bobby, who was going to work by bicycle. Bobby offered Nancy a ride, so because she didn't want to be late, Nancy accepted the offer. Upon arriving at work, Nancy immediately met the restaurant owner. It turned out that the restaurant owner was her own father, and Nancy had just been appointed as the manager of the restaurant. The father told Nancy to be more disciplined so that she could be an example for the other employees.
Manager now. Coworkers need to look up to you.
Today, Nancy's father has a date with his new girlfriend. Nancy's own mother has long passed away, and Nancy's father needs someone to accompany his life because he has been lonely for a long time, and Nancy is asked to work overtime until the restaurant closes. When Nancy was cleaning the table, she saw a customer's plate filled with peanuts and fried eggs, which made her nauseous, and immediately threw up behind her. Coincidentally, there was Jake, the restaurant chef who was also Nancy's father's confidant and would also be on the same shift as Nancy tonight. Jake apparently had a strong feeling when he said that Nancy was pregnant. Not long after, Nancy's father appeared just as Nancy was still vomiting. The understanding Jake immediately changed the subject by saying that Nancy vomited because she smelled a plastic bag containing rotten meat, so Nancy's father did not suspect Nancy's pregnancy.
I'll be right in.
After Nancy's father said goodbye to go on a date, Nancy continued her work. While calculating the report, one of the employees named Peter accidentally spilled water. Because he had a mental disability, Nancy understood his mistake. Not long after, a group of teenagers on bicycles appeared who usually disturbed people. Nancy, who did not want the restaurant environment to be disturbed, immediately went out to chase them all away. Because of her pregnancy, Nancy became very sensitive and easily angered. This made all of her employees angry, including Peter, who did not clean up the spilled water. Furthermore, the teenagers dared to enter the restaurant wearing masks and pretended to order food. Nancy became increasingly annoyed and angry.
We're paying customers.
We're not going to serve you.
Realizing that the teenagers were just messing around, Nancy, who was starting to get angry, threatened to call the police. However, Jake, who was near the phone, could hear clearly that Nancy was just bluffing and not really serious about it. As a result of the incident, Nancy vented her anger on all the employees such as Jake, Bobby, Peter, and 2 other employees. According to Nancy, they should have helped her chase away the teenagers, not just stay silent and do nothing. Jake, as a senior at the restaurant, thought that the kids were just joking around and Nancy didn't need to act so rudely.
Shut up, Jake.
No, I'm serious. You act like you're all high and mighty, but you're from the same place for 5
Enough.
seconds.
Feeling unappreciated as a manager, Nancy immediately fired Jake, who was her father's confidant and had an important role as a chef at the restaurant. Jake apologized and admitted that he still had outstanding installments and bills, and begged Nancy not to fire him. However, because she had already said something and wanted to show her firmness as a manager, Nancy did not go back on her words and immediately told Jake to leave right away.
And you're still here.
After the meeting, Nancy hurriedly washed her face to calm herself down. Bobby, who meant well and wanted to check on her condition, was also sprayed and even told not to be a caring person. Because of her own behavior, Nancy had to work the night shift alone and contacted her father to inform him about Jake's dismissal this afternoon. Hearing that, the father was surprised because Nancy made a decision too quickly, even though Jake had an important role in the restaurant. Although the menu sold was ordinary, Jake had good experience and cooking skills. Nancy could have just gone home and closed her restaurant, but their restaurant was in bad financial condition and had a lot of bills to pay, so Nancy had no choice but to stay there until the next morning.
All right, well, you enjoy your whatever.
Because there were no customers yet, Nancy, who was bored, played music while cleaning and dancing alone in the restaurant. After dancing, Nancy saw several bicycles belonging to naughty teenagers lying across the street. Realizing that they were going to play pranks again, Nancy immediately spoke through the speaker and threatened to call the police again. However, the teenagers didn't care and instead banged on the glass, which scared Nancy. This time they had gone too far, so that Nancy was very upset and really contacted the police. The operator informed that all of his units were currently busy because there was a gruesome murder case elsewhere, so it would take a long time to send officers, and maybe only one officer would be sent to this place.
I'm at the Fat Bottom Bistro on 9. I got these kids harassing me.
With no other choice, Nancy was forced to endure while waiting for the officers to arrive. As she was watching the window, the masked teenagers began to launch their terror that made Nancy scared. As Nancy hid in the kitchen and looked for her phone, suddenly the sound of a police car siren was heard. Luckily, Nancy could breathe a sigh of relief after the officers arrived there. The officers immediately went around checking the surrounding area and found an open water tap as if it had just been used. The officers then contacted the center and informed that so far everything was still safe and under control. While having coffee, the police officer invited Nancy to tell what was happening. However, when Nancy told about a group of masked teenagers using mopeds or a type of motorbike that had pedals, the police immediately realized that the group was the same group that had committed a terrible murder in another place. Before coming here, the police officer admitted that he had visited the scene of a terrible murder committed by a group of masked teenagers using mopeds. So, it is certain that the person terrorizing Nancy right now is the group in question. When the two of them were about to leave this place, suddenly the police officer was killed by one of the teenagers. Nancy immediately hid in the warehouse until Bobby finally appeared, confused.
Bobby, what the fuck are you doing?
I'm sorry, but what?
Nancy quickly pulled Bobby into the restaurant and they hid in the kitchen just as one of the teenagers entered. And in the end, they were both caught. Nancy and Bobby were tied up and forced to kneel. Then their heads were raised so that they could see each other. Because Nancy continued to struggle, she was taken to the back. There, Nancy managed to untie herself and immediately took a knife, until she managed to injure one of the perpetrators. With the knife still in her hand, Nancy ran out. However, because there was still one perpetrator who was riding a motorbike, Nancy slowly retreated to the back, looking for an opportunity to escape. But Nancy accidentally stabbed Peter, who was doing something here, where Nancy and all of us who watched would be very surprised when we just found out that they were all Jake, Bobby's brother, including Bobby himself, who turned out to be in cahoots. To understand why all this could happen, let's go back to this afternoon, right when Nancy fired Jake. It turned out that Jake was a drug addict. He really needed this job, but not to pay installments or other important needs, but to buy illegal goods. Peter, who is Jake's younger brother, must always obey his brother's wishes when he is asked to buy illegal goods from a seller. Because Jake had no money, he asked to borrow money first, while showing a gun that was in his car dashboard.
Sound good?
On the way home, Jake immediately used the illegal item. When his head could not think clearly, he happened to see a group of masked teenagers on mopeds having a bonfire party on the side of the road, and decided to join them. Instead of joining the party, Jake apparently just wanted to say something. He felt that it was because of the teenagers that he was fired today. If they hadn't come to the restaurant, maybe Nancy wouldn't have gone berserk and fired him. Jake, who was starting to lose control of his emotions, stabbed one of the teenagers and shot the other three very cruelly. The most pitiful thing here is Peter, Jake's own brother, who is innocent and doesn't know anything but has to be involved in this cruel act. After killing the 4 teenagers, Jake and Peter loaded the moped, including their masks, onto the car. Jack told Peter to go to the restaurant while he would meet Bobby and his brother at their residence. Upon arriving at Bobby's residence, Jake discussed Nancy's annoying attitude today. He put forward the idea of pranking Nancy by disguising himself with a mask and using a moped. Bobby and Jake's brother immediately agreed. Bobby had time to ask about his mask and moped, and Jack replied that he borrowed them from a group of teenagers who were hanging out and asked Bobby not to worry about it. Switching to Peter, who had arrived at the restaurant, he saw his hands still covered in blood after being forced to kill the group of teenagers. He decided to wash his hands in the tap water behind the restaurant, which ultimately answered the question regarding the open tap when the police checked him. Not long after, Jake and his friends finally arrived at the restaurant according to the terror we saw earlier. They turned out to be hiding behind the restaurant and started pushing the glass wall, including making a series of terrors that scared Nancy. When the police came, they all immediately hid. When Nancy and the officer were discussing the murder at the previous crime scene, Jake, who was afraid of being caught, was forced to hit the officer from behind. When Nancy was faced with a situation full of fear, Bobby accidentally saw it. He felt sorry for her and decided to take off his mask and pretend to have just arrived, as if he wanted to help. From there, everything went wrong, until Nancy accidentally stabbed Peter, Jake's younger brother who didn't know anything. Jake told his older brother to look after Nancy, while he and Bobby would take Peter inside to be treated.
All right, bud. Come on.
Seeing that his older brother was off guard, Nancy quickly ran to the back. She accidentally found a bag of rotten meat and thought of an idea to use it. Turning to Jake, who was holding back his younger brother Peter's bleeding, Bobby, who felt that this action had gone too far, secretly took the policeman's car keys to escape.
I want to know how she was in the sacrifice.
At the same time, the father, who was on a date, tried to call Jake repeatedly to discuss his dismissal without his consent. The point is that Jake will still work at the restaurant and does not need to care about his daughter Nancy, who is always emotional. However, it was too late because Jake had already done this far and his phone was left in the car.
From her, would you? Thanks.
Nancy herself was involved in a chase with her brother. She managed to push him into the frying pan and finish him off because she was forced. When Nancy was hiding under the table, she saw Bobby lying in a pool of blood after previously being involved in a fight with Jake. Right at the same time, Tabitha appeared, who came according to Nancy's previous call. However, Tabitha decided to leave again after seeing the terrible conditions in the restaurant. Ignoring Tabitha, Jake immediately chased Nancy, who fled to the storage room. Just as the morning sun began to rise, Nancy quickly escaped. Jake managed to stab Nancy from behind and dragged her back into the restaurant. Without knowing that Nancy was pregnant, Jake stabbed her in the stomach and immediately left the restaurant. Not long after Jake left, Nancy suddenly woke up and it turned out that she was still alive. Thanks to the expired or rotten meat that she had attached to her stomach using plastic, she was still injured when Jake stabbed her from behind, although not too deep. When she saw Bobby, Nancy finally admitted that the fetus she was currently carrying was Bobby's child, the result of their relationship when they were drunk together at a party. Nancy took the police car keys and decided to go to Jake's house to make a calculation. Without any significant difficulty, Nancy was able to easily attack Jake from behind. So this incident ended. With a weak condition from blood loss, Nancy walked to the restaurant. Not long after, her father appeared and asked what had happened. Nancy, who was still traumatized and injured, could only briefly explain what had happened. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Amri Film channel so you don't miss the next movie recaps.